Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, many different styles, but I think it is still fair to say that this brewery are best known for their different New England hazy IPAs. These guys are also one of the best known breweries here in Sweden and one of my most reviewed breweries here on the channel. So the beer that we're going to have a look at today is a style that we've had from them a few times before. They seem to do a couple of these beers a year, but they've always been pretty nice when I've had them, and I've heard very good things about this beer in particular. So I have to say, I'm very curious to see how it turns out, but I'm always curious about my beers. But hopefully this one's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again. Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get the Gothenburg catchphrase in when we review the Gothenburg beers because it's just channel tradition these days. And for this review, we are going to return to the wonderful Stigbergets Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Hotspot Stout. It comes in at 12.5% ABV, and as you might have guessed by now, this one is an Imperial Stout. But this beer has been brewed with bitter almonds and vanilla, and it was released as part of the local Osmoskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for January of 2022. So yeah, this should be pretty nice. When I saw this one, it just got me very, very curious. I actually thought it was going to be like a chili stout or something going by the name, but no, apparently bitter almonds and vanilla. So yeah, not something, I don't remember ever having specifically bitter almonds in an Imperial Stout before. So this should be a little bit of a learning experience. After 3,200 reviews, you do want one that's going to kind of test you a little bit. So let's crack on with this one then and see how we go. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Stigbergets Bryggeri before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you once again a little bit about Stigbergets Bryggeri. So Stigbergets Bryggeri, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast, and the company was founded by Nils Hultkrantz and Richard Simonsson. So the pair owned two bars, and they still do own the bars that share one kitchen. This is Bar Kino and Hagbjörn's Cafe, and these can be found on Linnegatan in Gothenburg, and they both opened back in 2007. And this building is actually an independent cinema. But originally the idea was to brew a few beers that they could sell in the bars, and this led to them kegging the beer and eventually to selling it to other pubs and then bottling the beers, which began in November of 2014. So the original beers were mainly English and German styles, but of course they really started to make a name for themselves when they focused on the more hoppy American styles of beer. The original head brewer was Ole Anderson, who is a co-owner of OO Brewing. He was the creator of the GBG Beer Week beer for 2016, which was one of the first New England IPAs, if not the first, to hit the Swedish market. He also created the Amazing Haze, which is one of Stigbergets' most popular beers today, and also the Narangi under his own brand OO. But he left the company in April of 2017 to go full-time with his own brand, OO, and he was replaced for a short period of time by Barnaby Struve, who was one of the vice presidents at Three Floyds over in Munster in Indiana in the US. But they moved the brewery at this point to Partihalarna, where they were brewing 5,000 litre batches at a time, and they also began to work on some sour beers during this time as well. But they started selling their beers in 440ml cans like this one. Quite often most of their beers are in these 440ml cans, but the higher alcohol ones, a number of those tend to be in the little 330 Red Bull type cans, so not 100% sure why this one Wasn't released like that actually, so that's an interesting point. But this has allowed them to export their beer a lot more and get their name out there. And like I say, these guys are probably one of the best known Swedish craft breweries these days. But they now have a brew team of Ollie Banks, who used to work for Beavertown in London, and also Lucas Munraid, who used to work for All In Brewing, one of the numerous gypsy breweries operating in the Gothenburg area. But as of summer 2020, they've moved to a new brewery in Ringen, and they're going to brew some lambic beer there, from what I understand. And apparently, the whole idea behind this new brewery is that it's going to be an experience brewery. They've got room for like swimming facilities and stuff like this apparently. So once the whole pandemic thing buggers off, we will need to get up to Gothenburg and take a look at this, and hopefully we can do an interview with Niels and Richard, and do a meet the brewery sort of thing. That would be very cool actually. And I do want to go and meet Ollie Anderson from OO Brewing too. So yeah, these are things for the future. But they opened up a bar in Stockholm, I believe in April of 2020, if memory serves me correctly. They've also got a folk öl shop these days in Gothenburg. And remember, folk öl is anything in Sweden that is 3.5% and below. That means that private companies can sell it rather than Systembolaget. Anything above that, of course, has to go through Systembolaget. And I believe they've just got involved with a restaurant in Gothenburg as well. They've now got a collaboration restaurant that has either just opened or is just about to open. I'll need to look up that for the next Stigbergets review. But yeah, these guys, as I say, a very, very well respected brewery. As of February 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, we're at the very start of February now, these guys have produced around 165 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. But yeah, that's everything I can tell you about Stigbergets Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn a little bit more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's it for just now. Let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer itself. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on the can before we open this one up. There you go. You can see, I think this is the outline. This kind of outline of the factory's been on a few of their beers. I remember when they did the kind of lager series recently, actually. They had quite a few. They had quite a few beers that had this sort of factory thing on it. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly why they've called it Hotspot. It didn't seem to be. When I looked it up on like Glassbanking and on Untappd and things, there wasn't really any mention of. If this beer was done for any special occasion or something like that. The Facebook page didn't really seem to say either. It just told you, oh, we're releasing this beer through Systembolaget. So yeah, I'm not sure what the inspiration behind the name or anything like that is, but it's a 440ml can, and I want to say that I paid 80 Swedish kronor for this. When you consider what it is, a 12.5% Imperial Stout, that's pretty good going. 80 Swedish kronor translates to about €8, somewhere in the region of like £7 sterling. And for those of you in other places, that's going to be about $9 American, something like that. So for a big 12.5% beast of an Imperial Stout, I think that's a pretty good deal actually. People complain about Systembolaget, and yeah, some of the things of the system make it quite clunky, but it does keep craft beer at a pretty good price actually. But yeah, let's get this guy out. The Hotspot Stout, an Imperial Stout with bitter almonds and vanilla, 12.5% ABV from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg. Let's get this guy out and we will get on with the tasting then. I'm very, very curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. Here we go. So, yeah, anyway, there we are. I've just got a little whiff of that there, and I'll tell you, it smells pretty damn good. But anyway, so we've got about 80% of the beer in the glass, and I'm just going to sip on this one for the rest of the day, actually. I'm actually drinking this beer about lunchtime. I just fancied it, Sometimes you get in this mood when I'm sitting reading, doing reading stuff and doing my programming. Sometimes you just fancy a beer. And that's what it was today. But anyway, before the head on this disappears, you can see this one poured with about a quarter finger of a frothy, I would say very light beige, maybe slightly fawn type colour. You guys can have a little look at that. There you go. You can see the head on this one. But yeah, that head, of course, with this thing being 12.5% ABV, the head has faded away very, very quickly. It's just leaving a nice little foamy ring around the edge of the glass. There's one or two big bubbles sticking to the side of the glass, but not really very many at all. A few small bubbles just going up toward the bottom of the head there. But overall, it looks pretty nice. In terms of colour, as you can see as well, this one's a big, dark, ebony rosewood colour, which is exactly what you'd expect from an Imperial Stout, of course. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. That goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do and any adjuncts that you put into the beer can also affect the colour, but with Imperial Stouts it's very difficult to do that, because quite often they use black malts or special B or, you know, carafa, stuff like this, that already inherently has a very, very dark colour. When it comes to the wort boil on these beers, you know, you're talking quite often at least 6 hours. I know Nerd Brewing down here in Skåne, they like to leave their wort boils on overnight and things just to really get things going. So yeah, interesting times, of course. And as I say, Stigbergets, they maybe release like 5 or 6 of these beers a year, probably more actually. Those are probably only the ones that come through Systembolaget, of course. But yeah, they do Imperial Stouts every so often. They're always pretty good. But yeah, this one, in terms of its like viscosity and things, it's certainly, just from shaking it about a little bit, it seems pretty thick, but not the thickest I've seen actually. But as I've told you in previous reviews, the Nordic Imperial Stouts are always pretty damn big in terms of their mouthfeel. Even some of the American ones have had beautiful flavours, but they're just not quite as thick as some of these big, these Nordic ones actually. It's very difficult to beat the Nordic countries when it comes to the mouthfeel of Imperial Stouts. But yeah, this beer, it certainly looks the part of an Imperial Stout. So nothing else we really need to say about the aroma of this one. I think about the appearance of this one, I should say. Let's move on to the aroma and have a little look. So let's go for it. Ooh, yeah. That's pretty damn nice. One of the things that I find about the Stigbergets Imperial Stouts, I mean, the ones that really stick in memory, was it called Yang Awake and Trouble Sleep. They had 2 coffee stouts that they did that were just absolutely lovely. So yeah, I really, really liked those ones. But yeah, the aroma of the aroma on those as well, and the flavour profile was, I remember it being like really quite straight shooting, but it was just such a well done beer. And sometimes that's the thing, you just want a straight, you know, a beer that's straightforward but just well brewed. And that's, you know, in my experience, that's what Stigbergets tend to do with these Imperial Stouts. They're always pretty straight shooting, but they do the job and they do it very, very well. So yeah, the aroma out of this one is very much like that. And it's interesting to me, if I was smelling this blind, you do get the bitter almonds out of it, but if I was smelling it blind, I would actually think the beer, it has a little bit of that almost kind of like candied syrup sort of thing that you can get out of like a Belgian double or a quadruple. It almost smells a little bit like that, like very slightly phenolic. And then you've got the nuts kind of mixing in with that. So the bitter almonds, I'd be curious to know how do they treat the almonds to make them bitter? Do they roast them or something like that? But yeah, this beer, the first thing that comes out of the glass at you is that the kind of nutty almond quality, and it smells, as I say, a little bit like it's got a very kind of slightly spicy, woody character to it in a way, but it also has a little bit of that kind of phenolic double, quadruple sort of thing that you can get, that sort of candied syrup. They always add candy sugar into those Belgian style beers, and this beer just has a little bit of that type aroma to it, which is interesting. So yeah, that's the first thing that jumps out of the glass at you with this one. But yeah, my favourite Imperial Stouts I've had from Stigbergets so far, but yeah, the Yang Awake and the Trouble Sleep, those were awesome. The one with the lion on it, I think that was just called Bourbon Barrel Aged Stout or something like that, or Bourbon Barrel Aged Imperial Stout. That was pretty good as well. We've had 1 or 2 others as well, which have been very good, but those are the 3 that kind of spring to mind. But we've reviewed a lot of beers from Stigbergets. We must be getting fairly close to 100 Stigbergets reviews. I wouldn't be surprised if we're so far away from that. But yeah, this is a pretty damn nice one actually. So it actually, the thing that comes to mind as well though with this is it does remind me of the Bourbon Barrel Aged Imperial Stout, the one with the lion on it. It smells really quite similar to that actually. But the backbone of this beer, to give you a more in-depth thing on the aroma, It definitely has a. It's got a lovely little bit of. You do get a wee bit of bread crust out of this one, but I'd say that's quite minimal. The backbone of this beer is really quite silky and smooth in a lot of ways. So yeah, you can smell a wee bit of bread crust and brown bread in there, but you've got a lot of chocolate to this one for me, and I'd say that it's leaning toward. There's quite a lot of like milky chocolate in this one, and I think that's because of the presence of the vanilla. So you get a lot of that kind of 30 to 40% milky chocolatey aroma coming out of this one, and that's enhanced by the vanilla. Behind that though, you do get a little bit of that higher cocoa chocolate, like a 70-ish% chocolate, but the nuts are in there, they're all mixing together with that. You've also got the the nuts are mixing together with that, which is great. You've also got the as I say, you've also got the you've also got a little bit of there is a wee touch of like a brown sugary element in there, but I think that takes a back seat actually. So it's got a wee bit of that oily, caramelly, toasty brown sugar note to it, but as I say, I get a wee bit of that kind of phenol-y. I'd be very curious to know what that is, but I get a very little bit of that kind of double, quadruple phenol-y type thing. So yeah, the way that this beer goes about its business in that sense is very, very nice. But other than that, other than one or two little like woody undertones to it, as we've said, I don't think there's much else we need to say about the malty side of the beer. Let's take a little quick look at the hoppy and fruity side of things. So on the hoppy side of the beer, it's pretty much what you'd expect. There's a wee touch of earthiness in there. I do get a little bit of a kind of floral brightness and a little bit of a grassy character. But the way that goes together is very, very nice actually. I get it's the hoppy character just adds a wee bit more depth to it, and on the fruity side of things, it is pretty much what you would expect. So I get a wee bit of as I say, there's that wee bit of that kind of candied phenolic thing. The more that you smell of this beer, it actually starts to come across as a little bit more kind of cakey. So I do wonder how much of a pastry stout. Maybe this is going to be like a sort of pastry stout actually, and that's is in my. As far as I can remember, that's something that Stigbergets haven't really touched upon actually. So we need to see how that turns out. But yeah, as I say, you've got a little bit of that kind of phenolic, dry red fruity sort of thing in this one. You do get a wee bit of the kind of straight up raisin and a wee bit of plum and stuff like that. And like a soft, figgy blackberry sort of thing. But yeah, that sort of phenol-y type vibe that you get out of this beer really kind of lingers there, and as I say, I'm pretty sure it's the bitter almonds, but to me it just the more that I smell of it, the fruity side of that kind of fruity phenol side starts to go away, but then I start to associate the aroma more. It gets nuttier and nuttier the more that you smell of it. But I don't really eat nuts. I've never really been into nuts all that much. So yeah, this one's going to be another sort of learning experience for me. But as I said, when I think about the other Stigbergets Imperial Stouts we've had before, they've always been quite straight shooting in terms of their aromas. Other than the coffee stouts, of course, the coffee beans give you a lot of different subtleties and things. But the kind of more straight shooting ones like this have always been straight shooting. So yeah, this is a nice aroma. Take a bit of time to just ponder this over before you get stuck into it. But yeah, I'm going to enjoy sipping on this the rest of the day, I think. So let's crack into it and see how we go. So yeah, this one is the Hotspot Stout, a 12.5% Imperial Stout with vanilla and bitter almonds from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg. As I always say, take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma, but let's try this. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Ooh. That is pretty nice. Yeah. First impression of it is, it is actually quite a roasty, toasty and bitter stout, this one, so that's quite nice. When I think about the name Hotspot, it does have a wee bit, it's not spicy or anything like that, but it's the bitterness almost gives the impression of it being a little bit spicy, a little bit kind of spicy, and I suppose in a way the almonds are going to give you a little bit of that bitterness, kryddig, as the Swedes would say. Yeah, spice. It's great. It's lovely. Yeah. So on the yeah, where do we start with this one? This is actually a very nice beer. This is one that's going to kind of gradually open up more and more as we drink it. So just be aware of that. But these beers are always sippers. You might even want to share the can with somebody. I know normally when I'm at home in Scotland, I always share my beers with my dad. But here, I just kind of sip on them myself. But yeah, this is very, very nice. So let's break this down for you and just describe it for you a bit more in depth. So on the backbone of this beer is really interesting. So we'll focus on the middle and the back third of your palate. Straight away, you can feel a little bit of the black malt. You can feel a little bit of black malt just kind of underpinning this beer. So yeah, you've got a lovely bit of that kind of roasty toasty black malt in there. That is the backbone of your beer. On top of that though, you can feel there is a wee bit of there is a bit of a very, very well fired kind of bread crust in there, and then a wee bit of a very slightly brown bready character. But the further you go into the aftertaste, that backbone really starts to push its way out a little bit more, which is quite interesting. But let's focus on the middle third of the palate just now and figure this out. So black malt, special B, whatever, a bit more of a toasty, well-fired bread crust, and then just a wee tiny hint of brown bread. Now on top of that, you get on top of that, you get a really nice kind of, as we see, you get a really nice sort of silky, kind of chocolatey character. And I would say that the vanilla in this one comes out a little bit more in the aftertaste. This beer, I've always said in reviews that more bitter flavours come out towards the back of the palate and your sweeter flavours come out further forward. This beer really, really shows that. This is one of the best examples I've had to kind of show that principle actually. So at the back of the palate, or at the back, let's just look at the middle third of your palate for just now. So at the back of that middle third of your palate, you can feel the chocolate, this one in the chocolate layer, you've got a really high 80-90% cocoa sort of thing then as you move further forward, towards the front of that middle third of your palate, you can feel the chocolate just kind of mellows out a little bit. So you go from like an 80-90% cocoa towards like a sort of 40% cocoa and a more milky chocolate. So yeah, I really like how that, I really do like how that goes together in this one. And yeah, the bitter almonds, I think they kind of sit toward the back. On that chocolatey layer, the bitter almonds sit towards the back of that middle third of your palate, but then as you come further forward, the beer really starts to lean more toward the vanilla side of things actually. So yeah, I do really like how that goes together. So, yeah, on top of that, yeah, on top of that, you do get a little bit of kind of, there's a wee bit of brown sugar to this one, but it's interesting. I'm just trying to pick out exactly what it is. So yeah, on top of that kind of silky chocolatey layer, you go into the middle of the palate, you've got a wee bit of a circle. And then you've got a little bit of this kind of oily, brown sugary. It's almost a little bit like caramelly, but yeah, I really do like how that goes together in that sense. So yeah, nice wee bit of an oily kind of silky caramelly sort of thing, and then there's a wee touch of as we say, you do get, the thing that's interesting with this one is that phenolic thing that I was picking out, the double quadruple type thing that I was picking out in the aroma. I'm actually, the brown sugary, that kind of circle in the middle of the palate, I'm actually getting a little bit of that. And at 12.5%, yeah, this is a beer that's going to show you its boozy side. And for me, when I drink an Imperial Stout, I want to know that it's a boozy kind of thing. So it's interesting with this one, you've got that sort of silky circle in the very centre of your palate. There's a wee bit of like a brown sugary sort of thing in there. I would say as well that from the mouthfeel, it doesn't feel like this beer has had too long a wort boil. I don't think this is. I think we're probably talking in the region of 6 hours, but I'm not sure how much beyond that. It doesn't feel quite as thick as some of the Nerd Brewing ones, for example. But yeah, that sort, you can feel that slightly leathery, brown sugary sort of thing in the middle of your palate, in that little circle. And then you've got a wee bit of, how would you say, you'd have a little bit of that kind of, dryness to it. You've got a little bit of kind of dry brown sugary sort of thing, and a wee bit of that kind of phenolic type vibe to it. So I do really like how that goes together in this one. So, with that, the further that you go into the aftertaste, some of that sweetness really does linger there, but you can feel the bitter almonds just really pushing their way out of this one, and a wee bit of the vanilla coming out of it too. So you've got, this slightly phenolic vanilla bitter almond thing. These three elements are kind of competing for your attention the further into the aftertaste that you go. But I would say this is a pretty damn bitter Imperial Stout. So calling it Hotspot is kind of interesting. But as I've said, there's a little bit. I don't know how readily, I'm not a cicerone. I just like beer. So I'm not sure from a technical perspective how easily you can conflate spiciness and IBU. They feel quite similar in the palate, I would say. But yeah, this beer gives the impression it's kind of got a similar vibe to it as a really high IBU, like Russian Imperial Stout. It's actually quite like that. It's definitely not a pastry stout, this one. I would not call this a pastry stout at all, because it doesn't have that kind of granola flavour about it that you quite often get in pastry stouts. And that's something I'm, to be honest, not that much of a fan of. Now, but yeah, I think we've covered everything we need to say about the middle third of the palate in this one, so we can focus on other aspects of the beer. So yeah, border region between middle third and back third of your palate. Again, you get a little bit of a bready build up there and a wee bit of bread crust. Base of the back third of the palate, again, you've got that really toasty, grainy, well-fired bread crust. On top of that, you can feel there is a bit of a thicker brown bready layer in there, and then you can feel the sort of bitter almonds, the sort of chocolatey layer and the bitter almonds just pushing in on top of that. Then on top of all of that, you've got the more kind of yeasty layer to the beer, which I really like. So, on top of all of that, you have you do get the bit of a yeasty character out of this one, and it's actually like the yeasty character doesn't feel that big in this one, but you can feel there's like a really sort of concentrated, really roasty, toasty, well-fired, bread crusty character to this one. So I do like how that goes together in this beer. So yeah, the further you go into the aftertaste with this one, it goes together. It does go together very, very nicely, actually. Yeah, on the, I think the back on the back third of your palate, the flavour does definitely feel taller, but it's really roasty and toasty. And again, as I said, this beer highlights that principle that bitter flavours come out further back on the palate. So it's really roasty and toasty and spicy the further you go into the further back of the palate go. But you can feel the flavour is taller, and then as you come further forward, it just condenses down and squashes together in that middle third of your palate. But the further into the aftertaste you go, this one does have a nice kind of spicy bitterness to it. So yeah, I really like how this beer goes about its business. I was going to say goes about its bitterness in that sense, but there we go. So yeah, I think that covers everything we need to say. The hoppy, the green component, the hoppy side of this beer is pretty straightforward. In the back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness. As you come further forward, you get a little bit of a herbal quality to it. Then as you push towards the kind of front corners of the palate, you've got a little bit more of a kind of floral aromaticity. Around the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and grassy. And then, yeah, I don't think there's anything else we need to say about the green component of this one. It's not overly bitter, but yeah, this is a beer that you probably could age a little bit if you wanted to, and some of the hoppy character would drop away, so it potentially feel a little bit less grassy and a little bit less floral the longer that you aged it. But yeah, I do like how this goes together. Yeah. So, on the on the fruity side of things, then let's focus on the front third of your palate and the fruity part of the beer. So the border region between front third and middle third, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up there. You can feel that there's a little bit of bread crusty, kind of brown bready sort of thing. The base of that front third of your palate is a little bit more. It's got a bit of that more kind of, it's like a really grainy bread crust that you're getting with this beer. The nutty characters don't quite come that far forward, but then sitting on top of that, you get that nice oily bubble where you get the kind of fruity, juicy esters just rolling their way out of the beer. I'd love to know what hops they've used in this one. I can actually feel the alcohol in this beer going to my head at this point, but I suppose we've maybe drank about a third of the can. But at 12.5%, this thing is pretty potent, although, when I think about there's a beer coming out soon from Systembolaget called the Singularity, which is a big 18% Imperial Stout or something like that from Lea Prudikoda in Estonia. That thing was a monster, I remember that. But this beer, I can feel the booze going to my head in this one. But let's focus on the fruity side of the beer just to round off. So yeah, fruity side of the beer then. You do get a wee touch of that kind of phenolic thing I was talking about with this one, which I do like. So yeah, a little bit of a phenolic, just a little bit of that. The very back of that front third of your palate, there's a wee bit of a sort of cakey sort of thing going on. Like if you think about a Christmas pudding and that little toasty, well-fired thing that you get on the edge of the pan, actually, it really reminds me of that. But on the on that side of things, I really do like how that goes together. But yeah, the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting. It's got when you first take it in. Yeah, when you first take this beer in, you get a little bit of raisiny character to it, but then on the back of that. On the back half of that front third of your palate, you really get like a big oily kind of plummy. You really get a big kind of oily plummy sort of character out of this one. So that goes together really well. So yeah, nice kind of oily plummy note there, and as you move further forward on this one, you really get a it kind of dries out a little bit, and I actually start to get a little bit of a datey kind of sort of thing to this one. There's a little bit of a plummy, pruny kind of vibe. So a wee bit of raisin on top, but then a lot of plum and prune, and then as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, it's got a little bit more of a kind of figgy, oily type thing to it. Yeah, more of a kind of figgy, oily kind of base, and then there's a wee touch of like a blackberry thing on top of that, but you do get a wee bit of that kind of phenolic, cakey, Christmas puddingy sort of thing on the front third of your palate. The fruity notes are very much like that. So yeah, fruity side of this beer is quite interesting actually. This is definitely a beer that's made me think a little bit. It's really kind of interesting. But yeah, I think that's everything we really need to say about the flavour of this beer. The fruity side, incidentally, is quite a big oily thing, and yeah, some of that phenolic character comes out too in the fruity side of the beer. But yeah, I think we can round off the review with a look at the mouthfeel. So for me, this beer, as it's opened up, it starts to feel a little bit thicker. So yeah, I think this one's kind of in it's in the middle of the full-bodied section. It's not the thickest I've come across, but it's pushing towards that. The carbonation is very smooth. The beer itself is quite oily and quite thick. But when we're talking about IBUs and bitterness, this one's definitely pushing towards that. But again, as I've said earlier, there's that kind of conflation there. Do you count the spiciness as IBUs? But it's quite similar. So it gives the impression, I think that's fair to say, it gives the impression of being like, an 80, 90 IBU. level stout, this one. The malt base, as we said, is quite roasty and toasty underneath. There's a bit of smoothness in the middle and a wee bit of sweetness on top, but there's quite a bit of spiciness to this beer. The vanilla adds a little bit of sweetness, and some of the leathery characters of the brown sugar are also giving you sweetness there too. So yeah, the malt base in this one is quite complex, but you expect that of an Imperial Stout, and the fruity side of the beer is kind of oily and phenolic in a sense, actually. It does have a little bit of that kind of phenolic quality. But yeah, this is a really interesting beer, and it does the job. It's not madly complex, but I've always found that with Stigbergets. Their Imperial Stouts are not madly complex, but they're always well done. And this one kind of maintains that sort of mantra, I guess we could say. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this review. This has been a really interesting one. A little bit of a longer review, but as I say, this is a beer. It's a style that I don't do that often. It's taken me a little bit of time to get my head around it. Plus the booze has gone to my head in this one. I can really feel this beer now. But that's, you know, that's what happens when you're in the middle of the day, you're programming something that's annoying you, and you just like, nah, I need a de-stress. That's what happened with this beer. But pardon me, yeah, let's leave it at that for this one. So this was the Hotspot Stout, 12.5% bitter almond and vanilla Imperial Stout from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast. Let's leave it at that. Thank you again for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Stigbergets Bryggeri, and we will no doubt return to these guys next month for another review. Slange it, skull, cheers, have a go at this one and see what you think. Cheers.